Computers are wonderful tools. They make life both easier and more complicated, often at the same time. This is one of life's little ironies that I have come to terms with. On the one hand, computers make it easier for me to keep track of invoices, payroll, billing, customer contact information. A lot of things I need to do to keep my business running. Using computers helps me keep costs down because I don't need as many people in the office. On the other hand, when those computers break down or some important files get corrupted, it can make things a heck of a lot harder. In the 7 years I've been running my family's landscaping business, there have been a few computer crashes. Of course, I've learned to minimize them. I have both local and cloud backups of important data. In addition, I've made at least some provision for backing up critical infrastructure so that in the event of an outage, the impact on operations will be minimal. Oh wait, I got so caught up in the technology issues, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Donald Summers, Don to my friends, Donnie to my wife and mother, and only to them. I am 35 years old. My height is 6'5" and my weight is 227 pounds, and I'm very proud to be low and fat among them. A life spent outdoors has made me, as my wife says, weathered. I also have a deep, semi-permanent tan. For the past 13 years, I have been married to the love of my life, Brittany Summers, formerly Carson. Brittany is a personal trainer at a local gym. She is also 35, and unlike me, she has a pale complexion. She is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and has a faint scattering of freckles on the bridge of her nose. At 5 feet tall, Britt is very petite and athletic, as you'd expect from a trainer. With her pale skin, light dusting of freckles, and adorable smile, Brittany looks a lot like a little pixie. We have 2 children, 9-year-old daughter Danielle and 7-year-old son Brian. The business, Summers Landscaping, was founded by my father. When I was a kid, I worked with my dad, helping him in the office. My mother had such a horrible pregnancy with me that they decided not to have any more children. As a result, I was very close to both of them and spent as much time with them as I could. I never had any doubt that one day, when Dad was ready to hang it up, I would take his place. When I got older, Dad insisted that I work in the fields with the crews. He said it would do a much better job of teaching me how business really worked than working in an office. To my surprise, I found that I really enjoyed it. I had never been afraid of manual labor, and here I took to it like a duck to water. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was leading work crews during the summer. When I finally went into business 7 years ago, I expanded my client base and services. We now have 12 different work crews and offer a huge list of landscaping, ornamental gardening, and, in the winter, snow removal services. As the number of work crews has increased, I've started to get out on site less often, except at peak times. But I still go out because I enjoy it. Besides, it's nice for the crews to know that the boss is out there checking up on them. Increasingly, however, I find myself in a small office attached to a company warehouse and working with the mountains of paperwork that arise in any growing business. Late March and early April is when I spend the most time in the office. I'm doing taxes, checking personnel records, reviewing contracts, etc. For about 2 weeks, I don't leave the office at all during business hours. It's been this way pretty much since I started running the company. This year, I had my mom with me. She said she was bored and just wanted something to do. She used to help my dad do the bookkeeping when he ran the business himself. But Dad didn't use computers, and Mom wasn't the most tech-savvy person in the world. She accidentally erased some very important files. Luckily, as I mentioned before, I know how to back up. But restoring that much data from backup storage takes time. Since I had a few minutes to spare while I waited for the files to be restored, I opened Google Earth. I've been using this tool a lot lately. It helps when you are planning a project to have a God's eye view of the area before you start working with backhoes and trenchers. This way, I didn't have to spend money on expensive aerial photography until it was time to surprise the client at the final presentation. I spent a few minutes on this project, but in the end I decided I had done what I could with it without the client's input. My backups were still not fully loaded, so I decided to take a look at my own house. I had been wanting to put in a pool for a long time, and now that the kids were a little older, I thought it might be time to consider the idea more seriously. And that's where it all went haywire. As I clicked on my mouse button and zoomed in on my house, I noticed something strange. There was a car in our driveway that was unfamiliar to me. I try to be as involved in my family as possible and know almost all of Britt's friends. However, I didn't pay much attention to it at first. The photo was apparently taken last winter. There was a light covering of snow on the house and lawn. A glance at the garage showed that the addition I had made to it was complete, which meant the photo couldn't be more than 4 months old. The garage expansion was my winter project. The car I didn't recognize was red, but that was all I could tell. I'm not very good with cars and wouldn't have been able to identify the make and model anyway. I looked at the progress bar on the file transfer and saw that it was barely moving. Oh well, at least I have something to occupy my time while waiting, I thought to myself. I switched back to GE and stared at the satellite image of my house for a few more minutes. The angle of the sun gave me no clues as to the time of day. I said, not realizing I had made a sound. Then I clicked on the tab with the street view. I knew even before this that it probably wouldn't help. It was very unlikely that the street shot was taken on the same day and at the same time as the one above. Nevertheless, I had time and I was curious. So I made that fateful mouse click. The view from the street was taken later. It was sunny and the dogwoods I had planted in the front yard were just starting to bloom. The car that had piqued my interest was nowhere to be seen. But my wife, Brittany, was. She was indeed visible. She was standing in the doorway of our house, hugging a strange man and kissing him soundly. My temper instantly flared up. My wife, was kissing and touching another man. I forced myself to calm down. Before I did anything else, I printed out several copies of the picture. I needed a hard copy. Then I scrutinized the man in the photograph. The camera angle didn't allow me to get a good look at his face. Nevertheless, he looked vaguely familiar. It was almost a physical effort to suppress my anger. He would make himself known, but first I had to find out what was going on. What was going on in that picture was definitely inappropriate, and whatever else happened, we would have a conversation about it. As much as I was hurting and uncomfortable, I had to find out what else was going on. But how? I've read many stories like yours where the husband sets up cameras all over the house, or sometimes he installs simple voice recorders. Sometimes he hires a private investigator. These are all options, of course. I'm tech savvy enough to put up cameras. It's not quantum physics, after all. Installing recorders is easy too. Hiring a private investigator is just as easy, although the cost can be prohibitive. For that matter, in my line of work, I don't have set working hours. If I wanted to follow her or casually peek into her house, I could do so with minimal damage to my business. Besides, I needed to think about my end goal for a second. Wait a minute, I thought, shaking my head. Before I can come up with an end goal, I need to know what's really going on. Let's deal with this first, and then we can think about what to do about it. I roared, glancing at the picture again. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get my anger back into its cage. And then a thought occurred to me. It might not be a good one, but it could be a starting point. The man in the picture vaguely resembled Britt's ex-boyfriend from back in her college days. It took a few minutes, but I finally remembered the guy's name. Benjamin Clausen. Yes, it was him. He was a big football hero at State and led the school to its first regional championship in decades. Completely forgetting about the backup files, I opened my web browser and started searching. You know, I think the average person would be completely shocked, and maybe a little intimidated, by what can be found with a simple Google search. In just 30 minutes, I had photos, some biographical information, and job information that was in the public domain. I was amazed at how easy it was. After getting something like this, I briefly wondered how private investigators stay in business. But then, I dove into the heart of the matter. Apparently, Mr. Clausen made a name for himself in the real estate world after graduating from college. Sure, he tried playing in the NFL, but a knee injury prevented that. He first moved to Denver, California, and about 2 years ago he returned to our little hometown and opened his own office. From the information available in the public domain, he must be pretty good at moving property. Admittedly, he certainly had the looks to be a good salesman. Yeah, he had also managed to get married and have a child of his own. His child, it seemed to me, was also a good-looking little fellow. His wife was cute, but couldn't compare to Britt. At least not in my opinion. Her name was Angela Clausen, formerly Miller, and she was 37 years old. In the picture I found online, she had soft, curly, honey-brown hair. Her eyes were a nice shade of green, and when she smiled, she had cute dimples. She was heavier than Brittany, but not fat. Hell, Britt was so petite, most women you met were heavier than her. Mrs. Clausen was an accountant and apparently worked in her husband's real estate office. This, I thought with disgust, is the perfect income. As a realtor, he would be in the office at all times, but would always know exactly where she was. This would make it easy to find time for extramarital affairs. And, as an added bonus, she had virtually no chance of catching him doing it. And then, an evil idea hit me. I glanced at my watch. 10:33 a.m. I looked up the number for Benny Boy's real estate office in the local phone book and called. Good morning. You've reached the Clausen Real Estate Agency, a local partner for all things real estate related. How may I direct your call? A pleasant, throaty female voice answered. Good morning. Please connect me to Mr. Ben Clausen, asked I. I'm sorry, replied the voice, but Mr. Clausen is currently away showing a property. I expect him back in about an hour or 90 minutes. Would you like to leave your contact information and I'll have him call you back? No, thank you, I said. I think I'd better call back later. Goodbye. I pressed the end key and slipped the phone back into my vest pocket. I had one last chance to think. I wasn't sure there was anything resembling an affair between this guy and my wife. However, the fact that Britt was doing something very inappropriate with another man had been established. The man in the Google Earth image looked a lot like Ben Clausen, and the fact that he was a former boyfriend was pretty convincing. I felt an overwhelming urge to act, to do something. It may not have been the best idea of my life, but I decided to go on the offensive. I grabbed a copy of the printout I had made of the GE photo and headed to my truck, closing the office behind me. I jumped in the truck and started the engine, but when I turned around to check out the back before pulling out of the driveway, I saw a toy car sitting on the cab bench. My son must have dropped it the last time he rode in the truck. Despite my anger, I paused. Whatever was happening, whatever was going to happen, the choices I would make would affect more than just me and Britt. I also had to think about the two precious, innocent little lives that I, as a loving father, was obligated to protect no matter what. For a few agonizing moments, anger fought with reason before I finally released the brakes and drove into the street. I drove to the address listed on Benny Boy's website where his office was located. It turned out to be on the 5th floor of a new office building that had just opened as part of a downtown revitalization project. Not that there's much room for downtown revitalization, I thought as I parked nearby. I waved to the foreman of one of my work crews as I headed toward the main entrance. It's ironic that my company is contracted to improve this area, I thought. There was a look of surprise on the foreman's face as I entered the building rather than approaching to talk to him. However, I was on a mission. I had other things on my mind right now. As I walked through the atrium to the elevators, strange looks were thrown at me, but I was used to it by now. Even without my attire, worn, faded work jeans, heavy boots, a tight t-shirt pulled over bulging muscles, and a reflective contractor's vest, setting me apart from all the business suits and skirts, my size had to be considered. The pale-skinned office dwellers that populate such places did not fail to do a few double takes. A few seconds of waiting in the elevator brought me to the 5th floor. Soon I was walking through the door of the Clausen Real Estate Agency. Behind the chic receptionist's office desk sat Mrs. Clausen. Her photos were either outdated or taken by someone who didn't care to show her at her best. It was still easy to recognize her. Same hair, same slightly rounded face, and cute smile. But she was definitely slimmer than her picture made me realize. Also, I noticed that she was much taller than Britt. When she walked up to me, I saw that the top of her head reached my chin. "Hi," she said, extending her hand politely. "I'm Angela. How can I help you today?" I responded to her handshake, noting that she had a firm, professional grip, and she didn't hesitate to make eye contact. Clearly, this was a professional businesswoman accustomed to greeting potential clients. My first impressions were favorable. Perhaps we could help each other. "Hello, I'm Donald Summers," I said. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Summers. How can I help you?" "Mrs. Clausen," I began formally. "I have a photograph I'd like you to look at and some questions." I held out the envelope in which I had placed the photograph. Angela's eyes narrowed as she assessed my tone and expression. "I take it you're not here to talk about buying a house?" she said dryly. It wasn't a question, but I shook my head negatively anyway. She thought for a moment, then her face took on a professional, businesslike expression again. "Please follow me," she said simply. She led me to a door at the back of the room. As we passed through it, she paused to ring the next doorbell. "Chris, keep an eye on the front desk, please." "Sure thing, Angie," came a deep voice from the room inside. Without another word, she led me into the break room and closed the door. She made herself comfortable at the table and gestured for me to join her. The look on her face said she was waiting for me to get to the point. I opened the envelope, pulled out a photograph, and held it out to her. "The woman in this picture is my wife, Brittany," I said. "I know that when we were in college, she dated Ben Clausen for a while. I want your opinion. Do you think this man is your husband?" Angela took the picture from me like a dirty diaper, reluctantly, but with a feeling like she'd done something she just had to do. She stared at it for a few minutes, her expression changing from curiosity to a kind of morbid sadness, and then finally to anger. At the end of 5 or 6 minutes, she handed it back to me. "Yes," she said. "I am sure it is. When was it done?" "I don't know exactly when," I said. "I found it on Google Earth in Street View. They're standing by the front door of my house, but they can't be more than 3 months old." "How do you know that?" she asked. I pointed to Britt's ear. "I gave her those earrings for Christmas," I answered simply. Her eyes met mine, and I noticed a hint of sympathy in them. Then she turned away and stared out the window for a few minutes. Finally, she turned to face me again. "I'm sure it's my husband in the picture," she said, breathing heavily. "I recognize the clothes and his face, and the fact that they were dating is highly suspicious. Have you spoken to your wife about it?" "No, I only found it this morning," I said. "Besides, with her schedule, she should be at work right now." "But is she at work?" I stared at her for a minute, then sighed. I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed Brittany's number. I didn't expect her to answer during work hours, and she didn't. I then called the gym. I recognized the voice of the person who answered me. It was Mandy Thomas. She worked there as a trainer and was a friend of ours. "Hi, Dawn," she said cheerfully, recognizing my voice. "How are you?" "Hi, Mandy. Listen, I really need to talk to Britt. Put her on the phone, please." There was silence on the phone for a minute. Mandy was so quiet that I could hear the fast music coming from the gym and the clinking and clanking of the weight machines. "Mandy, are you still here?" Yeah, Dawn." His voice was interrupted. "What?" I asked, tired of the evasiveness. "Dawn, she left a little while ago. She said she was meeting you for lunch." "True," I said coldly. "And how long ago did she leave?" "Well, maybe about 10 minutes ago," Mandy replied nervously. She obviously realized something was wrong. "Did she happen to say where she was meeting me?" Yeah, she said she was going to Logan's," Mandy replied nervously. "Thanks, Mandy," I said, and hung up. "So what did she say?" asked Angela. "Hold on a second," I said. I opened the Find My Phone app. Britt and I had it because Britt kept losing hers. I kept suggesting she buy one of those phone cases that attach to your waistband or pants belt, but she waved it off. And it only took a few seconds for the app to show me the locator icon. She was at our house. Or rather, her phone was at our house. But that didn't mean Britt was home at all. However, when she left the house this morning, she had her phone in her hand, so I know she didn't leave without it. I put the phone away, looked at Angela and told her what I had been told and what I had just discovered. I watched her expression harden with anger. Before I knew it, she was up from her seat and heading out of the back of the office toward the exit. I struggled to keep up with her. "Chris," she said, "I'm going to lunch. If Mr. Clausen gets back here before I do, call me immediately. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am," replied the astonished worker. Angela looked at me as we entered the elevator, her eyes blazing with anger. "With a mood like mine, I think you'd better go," she said, furiously pressing the first floor button. "You'd better have a damn good explanation for that picture. I already let him off the hook once." "He's cheated on you before?" I asked, flabbergasted. And then I realized that wasn't something you should ask someone you'd just met. "I'm sorry, it wasn't—" "Don't worry about it," she said with a half smile. "And the answer is yes, he's done it before, back in Colorado. In fact, that's partly why we moved here to Indiana, to get a fresh start. I forgave the bastard because of little Robbie." Her eyes softened and lost their sharpness at the mention of her son. Then they went soft again. "But Robbie's not so little anymore, and I'm in no mood to forgive this morning." Next chapter. The first few minutes of the car ride passed in silence. Finally, Angela's curiosity, or need to talk, took over. "I'm a little surprised that your wife dared to take my husband into her home," she said. "It's a risk," I said, "but that risk is minimal. She knows that at this time of year I don't usually leave the office because of all the things I have to do. I'm a creature of habit, like most people, and she knows me pretty well. Hell, even if I did go out, I'd call her and let her know about it, giving her more than enough time to escort her lover out of the house." There was bitterness in my voice, and I knew it. I threw an apologetic look at Angela to let her know I didn't blame her. "I'm so damn gullible and predictable, she could have been having fun behind my back for years, and I never would have known." Angela was silent for a moment as I drove to my house as fast as I could. When she spoke, I could hear the sympathy in her voice again. "There are almost always signs that a spouse is cheating," she said quietly. "Yes, I know there are," I replied. "But I haven't noticed them. Our intimate life didn't suddenly cut off or anything like that. She didn't behave differently toward me or the kids. At least I don't notice it. She doesn't spend any evenings with girls." "There were no classic signs with Ben either," she replied. "Not before, not lately. I just mentioned it because—" Her voice broke and she fell silent, staring out the windshield. I shrugged helplessly, still focused on the surrounding traffic. Turning onto my street, I noticed a red car in my driveway. I was so focused on this discovery that Angela's voice startled me for a moment. "That's Ben's car," she said. There was still anger in her tone, but there was also an undeniable note of sadness. Well, that was understandable. If I found what I expected to find in my house, it would end my marriage, and I suspect the same would happen to Angela's. I parked my car on the street in front of my neighbor's house. I glanced at Angela, then got out of the car and headed for the gate to the backyard. Angela followed me without saying a word, although I noticed that she pulled a rather expensive digital camera out of her purse. I had an even nicer one on my desk in the office, but naturally I didn't even think to take it. Damn it. I quietly opened the wicket gate, and we walked softly into the backyard. A few moments later, we were at the back door. I unlocked it and let us both into the house, closing it quietly behind us. There I stopped, listening intently. I could hear my wife's voice, and there was no doubt what she was doing. Her moans and quiet cries of pleasure were unmistakable. I won't lie. Underneath the shell of my rage, I felt my heart break when I recognized Brittany's voice. I gestured silently for Angela to follow me. The look on her face was a little strange, but I didn't pay any more attention to her. I was too focused on Britt's voice. I moved quietly through the kitchen at the sound of her voice. I thought it came from the living room. When I cautiously peeked out from behind the archway leading from the kitchen into the living room, there she was. Brittany, lying on the couch with some woman. Confused, I froze and looked around the room again for a moment. And then I finally saw Benny Boy. He was standing against the opposite wall, one-handedly filming what was happening on his tablet. Next to me, I felt rather than saw Angela filming on the camera. It broke the control the shock was exerting on me. I moved into the room, rage starting to take over. I tried to contain my anger. I've seen too many examples of what happens when people lose control, but I felt like I was losing this battle. Swiftly. Angela's hand darted out like a striking snake and grabbed my arm. I lunged at her, angry at the interference, but she shook her head and tried to pull me back. Well, I thought to myself, the damage to my marriage is already done and fixed. I guess I can wait another second or two before I start breaking things. I reluctantly stepped back and watched the scene ad nauseum. Next thing I knew, Benny Boy had joined the process. My rage was already close to boiling point, but I still snapped. Angela had no chance of holding me back. Ben Clausen was 6 feet tall or taller, and he weighed at least 190 pounds. He was in decent shape, but he couldn't match me in size or strength. Something, maybe the creak of a floor beam, or maybe just a sixth sense, alerted the unknown woman to my approach. She turned away from the scene on the couch to look at me, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't make a sound, but by then, it wouldn't have mattered. I was too close for anyone to run away or try to struggle. Reaching out, I grabbed him and pulled him back from the couch, dropping him to the floor. "Shut up, all of you!" I roared, punching Benny Boy. "Don't even think about leaving, you goddamn whore! If you get off before I let you leave, I'll rip you in half for touching my wife." I looked at the other woman and realized I actually knew who she was. Her name was Jamie Keller, and she lived with her parents in the last house on our block. She was 19 years old and was going to study to be a nurse or something in the health field, I thought. Brittany and I paid her to babysit for us on those rare evenings when my or her parents couldn't make it. "Jamie?" I said, hardly believing my eyes. The girl nodded her head pathetically. Why did you?" The words failed me. "I'm sorry," she said very quietly. "How long have you been?" I growled. "This is only the second time, I swear. It wasn't supposed to be the first time, you goddamn whore," said I, still furious. To me, cheating is cheating. It made no difference if Brittany did something with another man or another woman. If she had sex with someone other than me, that's cheating. I reached down and picked up the clipboard that had fallen out of Ben's hands when I interrupted his interlude with Brittany and Jamie. I picked it up and made sure she could see it. "I have a video of you doing some really nasty things. Get out of my house and never come back. If I find out you've had any more contact with my wife, and I don't care if you just bumped into her at the mall. I will put this on every site on the internet. I'll send links to your parents, grandparents, and everyone else I can think of. I'll tell the whole world about it on Twitter. I will do everything I can to ruin your reputation so badly that you won't be able to get a job pumping toilets. Do you understand me?" She stared at me in horror as I shook Ben's clipboard in front of her. "Yes," she said, her voice becoming a frightened whisper. "I understand." "Good," snapped I. "I'm done with you. Get out of here, you dirty whore." I pulled my cell phone out of my vest pocket and dialed a number on speed dial, making sure I put it on speakerphone. The phone only rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Hey, George," I said, recognizing my father-in-law's voice. Brittany squeezed her eyes shut, recognizing his voice as well. When they opened again, she stared at me, silently pleading with me not to do what she must have known I was about to do. Her silent pleas, however, were meaningless. There was no way in the world I was going to let what she did happen without causing her the maximum amount of harm. Why should I be the only one in pain? "Don," he replied with genuine pleasure. "It's good to hear from you. How are you doing?" "Well, George, I'm sorry to bother you, but something serious has come up. Could you and Virginia come over to our house sometime? The sooner the better. What's wrong? He asked urgently. Are the children all right? The kids are fine, George. They're still in school, I said soothingly. I'm afraid it has something to do with Brittany and me. I know that if I started telling you this over the phone, you probably wouldn't believe me. Rather than go through all of this, I'd rather show you hard evidence of what I'm about to tell you. My father-in-law was silent for a very, very long time. When he spoke again, I realized that he had an inkling of what was going on. There was nothing surprising about that. I had respected him since our first meeting and knew he was an intelligent man. I had so many reasons for a call like this. If it didn't involve his grandchildren, but had to do with Brittany and me, well, we'll be there in 15 minutes or less, Dawn, he said in a sad tone. I have to ask you not to do anything rash before we get there. Don't worry, I told him. I'm really going to think very hard about everything I'm going to do. I ended the conversation and then called my own parents. After a remarkably similar conversation, I put the phone away. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably, huddled against one end of the couch. She knew what I wanted. Brittany was going to have to do the slut walk herself. Angela, however, was not eager to cooperate with my theatrics. He needs a hospital, Dawn, she said calmly but firmly. I know you want to completely destroy your wife. I don't blame you one bit, but there are limits to which I'm willing to go. All right, I said. But how about this? Instead of taking him to the ER, how about you call an ambulance? She looked at me, sizing me up coldly. I saw the moment in her eyes when she realized why I had made that suggestion. The ambulance will be here in about 10 to 15 minutes. When they arrive, they will spend a few minutes assessing the patient's condition and then send them to the hospital. In other words, by offering to call an ambulance, I was trying to get her to delay her departure without denying her request to help this asshole with the treatment of his little broken tooth. Her look told me she admired my creativity, but not my spitefulness. Nevertheless, she sighed and nodded her head in agreement. Ignore the flashing lights, Dawn, she said. A few more minutes and nothing will change anyway. But once your revenge fantasy plays out, I'll have to take him to the ER. Do you understand me? I understand you, I replied. The tablet and camera will stay with you until you've collected all the data you need from them. After that, return the camera. I'll need it for the divorce. I don't care at all what you do with his tablet. Thank you, Angela, I said. She nodded and pulled out her cell phone and called the real estate office and said she had an emergency and to close for the day. Mr. Clausen was on his way to the ER. As I listened, I couldn't help but wonder why she was still here with this piece of shit loser. He'd already betrayed her once. She'd already said she was going to divorce him. Why stay? Hell, if I were her, I'd throw him out faster than a live grenade. My parents were the first to arrive. They lived closer, so it wasn't surprising. I opened the door and let them in. Mom was the first to see Brittany and Benny Boy and froze in place. Dad saw them a few seconds after her and stared at them in shock and confusion as well. Donnie, honey, what's going on? Mom demanded. Dad didn't say anything out loud, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. His face went from a sobbing Brittany to an angry Angela, to an injured Benjamin, and finally to me. I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't need an explanation. He put his hand on my shoulder and gave it a comforting squeeze, even as my mom, blushing at seeing her sister-in-law naked in front of her and two strangers, hissed. Donnie! She demanded again. What's going on here? I carefully explained everything to her, leaving nothing out, and offered to show her the video taken from two different perspectives. She quickly declined the offer, and her face took on an even richer shade of red. She grabbed an Afghan off the back of the couch and was about to hand it to Brittany, but I stopped her. No, Mom. I want George and Virginia to see that slut for what she is, I said. I want them to know, without a doubt, that it wasn't my fault that our marriage fell apart. Oh, no, Donnie, please don't say that, cried Brittany. Shut up, slut, replied I. What did you think was going to happen? I walked in and saw you entertaining yourself, and you didn't think I'd want a divorce? You must be one of the dumbest people I've ever met. My in-laws, George and Virginia Carson, showed up just a few minutes later. And they walked quickly to the front door where my father met them and let them inside. My mother-in-law, Virginia, greeted my parents with mild surprise, but my father-in-law, George, didn't seem the least bit surprised to see them. I wondered if he had talked to Virginia much about what he thought was going on. "Oh my God, Brittany! What are you doing?" She screamed when she saw her daughter. She headed toward her daughter, but stopped, nearly tripping over Ben. "Who's that?" she asked. "What the hell is going on here?" "So, slut, is it me who should tell her or you?" I asked my soon-to-be ex-wife. When she didn't make a sound, other than a pathetic whimper of misery, I proceeded to tell everyone how my morning had gone. I started with my file recovery problems and my little discovery with the God's eye view, and then told them about the results of my internet search and subsequent meeting with Angela. I then informed them of what I had discovered when I entered the house. All this time, both my parents and hers remained silent. Naturally, it was short-lived. "Donald," Virginia began, "this just has to be some terrible mistake. There's no way in hell Brittany would do anything like this." "I have videotape on 2 different devices that seems to disprove that, Virginia," I said calmly. "Would you like to see it?" I pulled the SD card out of the slot on Angela's camera and went to the TV. I intended to show it to them. I didn't respect Britt anymore, so I didn't care to spare her embarrassment. I didn't want anyone calling me a liar, no matter how politely they phrased it. "No, son, please don't," Mom's voice rang out. Her tone was full of sympathy and compassion, but there was also steel in it. "It won't solve anything, honey. It will only hurt people," she said. "I won't let anyone challenge the truth," I said firmly. "If anyone has any doubt that I'm telling the truth, I want to settle it here and now." "Don," George said, raising his hand in a calming gesture. "What are you going to do now? I think that's the most important question of all." I looked at him, and the expression on my face must have conveyed at least part of my feelings. What did this man think I was going to do? "I'm sorry, George, but divorce is the only way out," I said. "I don't want to live with a man like that, and I don't want him around me every day." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Angela helping Ben up. I didn't interfere as she gathered up his discarded clothes. George Carson's face hardened when I called his daughter it, but he decided not to give it much thought for now. "First," I began, "I want custody of the children. I'll allow Brittany free visitation, but they'll live with me. That's non-negotiable." "Wait a second, Donald. I know you're hurt and angry, but—" "This is not a negotiation," I said, cutting off Virginia's objections. "I've got all the aces in the deck. I will get what I demand, or Brittany will be the last amateur starlet to grace the internet. Do we all understand each other?" I turned away from them to look firmly at Brittany. "More importantly, do you understand, slut?" I told her. She stared at me, her own anger finally rising to push aside the humiliation and shame. "Don't you dare call me a slut again!" she shouted. "I'm not—" "You are a slut!" I shouted back. "You're just worthless gutter trash, and I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and let you raise our daughter just like you." Well, as you can imagine, things escalated to a screaming match at that point. I didn't want to give in an inch, and they hadn't even heard the rest of my demands yet. And neither did Brittany and her mother-in-law. We spent 2 whole hours yelling at each other, but then I realized it was almost time for the school bus to arrive. I looked hatefully into the eyes of the woman I loved more than anything in the world. "It's already time for the kids to go home," hissed I angrily. "Go wash your filthy cunt and get dressed before they get here. Then we can tell them why Mommy doesn't live here anymore." "No way." She waved it off. "I'll tell them why their daddy doesn't live here anymore." "Oh?" said I cautiously. "Okay, slut, work on your tail. I'll be in the den. Let me know if you change your mind, but I wouldn't linger if I were you." While Brittany and both of our parents looked on, I carried them into the den where they all knew our home computer was kept. I wasn't kidding, and I think they finally realized it. Either I'd get what I wanted, or that bitch would find videotapes of her adventures to distribute. Brittany rushed toward me. No! She screamed. Wait, goddammit! You know the courts won't give you custody. The courts these days are such that I could commit cold-blooded murder on the courthouse steps and still get custody. Not if you tell the judge you don't want it, I replied. She stared at me. I answered her in the same way, not trying to hide my rage and resentment from her. In fact, I wanted her to know how much I was hurt. But apparently she didn't want to back down. So I shrugged and turned away again. Damn it, Dawn, you can't do this! She shouted. Really? I asked. I'm sure I can. Look, it's easy. You won't do it. I know you wouldn't do that to me. You love me. Is that true? Asked I. Don't kid yourself. I will do it and take unholy pleasure in it. I never thought in a million years that the love of my life would cheat on me. Well, I was wrong, wasn't I? Plus, I just found out that my wife is a diver. That's very nice. I learned a lot of things today that I didn't know, and I have to say, it wasn't much fun. She wept again, but I can honestly say that I didn't care anymore. I was emotionally drained and just wanted to get it over with. Do you hate me so much that you'd really do that? She asked. Yes, I replied. I will never forgive you for what I saw today. And if you don't give me everything I want in a divorce, I will devote the rest of my life to destroying you, even if I destroy myself in the process. I paused again for a second, looking at the little bitch. I had no idea how long she'd been promiscuous with other men. Or rather, other men, since I had clear evidence that it wasn't just men. Are Daniel and Brian even mine, Brittany? How can you ask me that? She said, shocked. How can you cheat on me with multiple partners? I replied. Seriously, now I wouldn't believe you if you told me the earth was round. I thought you loved me. I loved you and trusted you with all my heart because there was no way you would have stabbed me in the back. Now I don't know what to believe. I never imagined you would turn out to be a whore. I shook my head in disgust, anger, and heartache. I slipped the SD card into my pocket and made sure I held the tablet firmly. Then I turned away from the den and walked back to the living room. Brittany followed at my heels. I could hear my parents and her parents talking in the living room as I approached. You don't really think he's really going to do that, do you, Frank? It could ruin poor Brittany's future. Honestly, Virginia, after what she did to my son, I couldn't care less about her future. What she did is just monstrous, and she deserves every ounce of shit she gets for it, came my father's voice. And all you think about is poor Brittany. What a load of crap. What about my son? What about his heart, huh? At that moment, I walked into the room. Everyone looked at me, and Virginia looked a little nervous. I threw her a look of disgust and shook my head, but I didn't waste time commenting. Britt was her daughter, and I suppose she couldn't help but be supportive. Look, Dawn, I don't think it's fair to insist on custody, Virginia began. At their age, kids need a mom. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carson. Have I somehow made it clear to you that I care what you think? I said. Look, fight it all you want. You know what the consequences will be. I'm a little surprised that none of you care that your daughter is a cheater, but whatever. I just thought you should know. You're free to go. I'd appreciate it if you took your daughter with you, but you probably won't. They both looked at me as if I had just slapped them in the face. Then they started talking amongst themselves, telling me how rude I was, how they hoped Brittany would take everything from me in the divorce, etc., etc., etc. Next chapter. You'll probably be shocked to learn that things didn't go the way either of us wanted them to. Okay, maybe you're not that shocked. Life sometimes screws with you in all kinds of ways. Also, Brittany may have been exaggerating when she talked about how things are in the courts now, but not by much. I really didn't think Brittany was stupid enough to call my bluff about the video, but she was. The problem for her was that I don't bluff. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Even if my parents, my lawyer, and even Angela told me it was a very bad idea. When the judge awarded her custody, Brittany gave me the biggest grin I've ever seen. I just pouted back. Once I got back to the room my parents let me use, I picked up the tablet Ben had left behind and drove to the nearest coffee shop. Taking advantage of their Wi-Fi, I uploaded my edited video to every website I could find. In addition to using Ben's tablet, I used his email address to send links to every member of Brittany's family I could think of. After that, I threw the tablet in the river. I also posted the links on Ben's social media accounts. That dumb bastard didn't change his passwords even though he knew I had his damn tablet. True to his word, Britt became a minor celebrity. Just a month after I posted my masterpiece, she lost her job at the gym because of it. But she still retained custody. Fortunately, since the divorce was final before she was laid off, I didn't have to pay spousal support. It was a bit of a humbling experience, but I was willing to do anything. She tried to get a piece of the family business, but that was one area where she failed. She hadn't done her homework. You see, I won't get ownership of the business until after my father dies. For now, he's the owner. I just run it for him. He pays my salary. I've never invested any of my own money in the business or any of our money together. Everything I've put in during the time I've been running the business has come from a savings fund set up by my dad a long time ago, and I can document this. So at least that amount was safe from my financially predatory ex-spouse. The judge awarded Brittany $600 a month in child support. My attorney couldn't prevent this, but he was able to delay the payments until we got the results of the children's paternity test. I insisted on the test mostly to hurt Brittany, not because I truly doubted that I was their father. Regardless, I was extremely relieved to get the test results with proof that they were mine. The bitch got half of our savings and half of the checking account. She didn't get the house, however. She just couldn't afford it with the money she was making, even before she lost her job at the gym. My attorney was able to get her to sell the house. Don't ask me how. I don't want to know. We split the money from the sale and she bought another, smaller house in the same school district. I felt a little sorry for the kids. I know they love their home, but I just couldn't stand the thought of my ex-wife profiting so much from her betrayal. I also bought a small 3-bedroom house in the same school district. I had to put truly draconian limits on my spending to afford it given the child support payments I had to make, but I managed. My father wanted me to increase my paycheck, but I told him no. If I had, the courts would have just increased the amount of child support I had to pay, so it wouldn't have helped me. Danielle and Brian at least liked my new house, but they hated the fact that their mother and I were no longer together. I tried my best to keep their little minds occupied with other things. We often went to the park, biking on the trails or hiking. Sometimes, if I had a little extra money, we would go swimming at the aquatic center. We had a lot of fun together. As for my personal life, I was single. Brittany was a wonderful lover, and we enjoyed a rich life. Once the divorce was finalized, I started dating again. I had done nothing wrong and saw no reason why I should have to do without someone special in my life. I had no problem getting female attention, so making dates wasn't difficult. But I wanted something more. I wanted a relationship again. The kids would talk about their mom from time to time. I knew why they did it, and it didn't make me angry. They still didn't know why we had broken up, and I hoped that would continue to be the case. The stories about Mom were a transparent ploy to keep me interested. They weren't used to two separate families, and they didn't like it. I didn't blame them, but I asked them several times to stop. I no longer loved or even cared for their mother, and nothing they said could get us back together. About 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Mandy Thomas, one of the personal trainers at the gym where Brittany worked. Used to work there. I was at the grocery store, stocking up on groceries. Last week was my week with the kids, and they had pretty much emptied the cupboards, as usual. "Hello, stranger," came her bright, cheerful voice. "Oh, hi, Mandy," I said. "How are you doing?" "Not bad at all, thank you. But more importantly, how are you?" I shrugged and smiled. "I'm doing fine, I think. I work and come home, work and come home. Mostly, I'm looking forward to spending the week with the kids. They're looking forward to Christmas, even though it's not even Halloween yet. She laughed along with me, and I couldn't help but admire her trim figure, bright green eyes, and shiny blonde hair. It surprised me a little that she checked me out as much as I did her. Last I heard Mandy was dating someone, but she was probably single now. Her next words proved that she was pondering about the same thing. So are you seeing anyone right now, Dawn? Nothing serious, I replied, shrugging again. Honestly, I just haven't really bonded with anyone, you know? And I know, she said, leaning forward and gently touching my arm. Mandy was taller than Britt by at least 7 inches. The top of her head reached about as far as her nose. That meant she didn't have to step back to look me in the eye. I liked that. In fact, I thought privately I might like her in general. She was attractive, smart, funny, and probably very attractive in bed. Her quiet laughter tore me away from my musings. Do you like what you see, Dawn? She asked, her eyes sparkling. Yes, I answered quietly, deciding to go for it. I really like what I see, Mandy, and I'd like to know if you have plans for dinner tonight. I don't really have any plans tonight, she replied, stepping closer to me. Then maybe you could come over to my place and I'll cook for you, I suggested, gently wrapping my arms around her slender waist and gently pulling her to me. And then maybe we can talk about dessert. Next chapter. My relationship with Mandy helped me regain a confidence I didn't realize I had. She was a resourceful and responsive lover. In addition, she was even smarter than I had initially thought. She was funny and good with children. She was also a great listener and friend. We agreed to an exclusive relationship after the 3rd date, and I never regretted it for a second. There was just something about this woman that I found irresistible. With her, I got the companionship I had been missing for so long. I guess you could say she made me feel complete, if that doesn't sound too cliché. Regardless of which terminology sounds better, I was happy, truly happy. For the first time since my divorce. Mandy and I had been together for a few months when I got an unexpected phone call from my former in-laws. Hi, I said. Hi, Donald. This is George Carson. Yes, George, what did you want? I asked without much enthusiasm. I had once liked George a lot, but during my divorce it had all come to an end. Admittedly, making Brittany a star in the adult movie world didn't help. But things happen when you're dealing with a man who thinks he has nothing to lose. I wanted to let you know that we have the kids now, he said. Brittany is in the hospital, and Virginia and I would like to stay with her. Would you mind coming to get them? Of course not. When would be a convenient time? I asked. George was silent for a while. He probably expected me to ask why my ex was in the hospital. That was stupid of him. Why the hell should I care? You can anytime, he finally said. But if you don't mind, I was hoping you could deliver them by 6 p.m. No problem, I said. I'm not doing anything right now, so I'll be right over. You don't care at all that Brittany is hospitalized? He asked before I could finish talking. No, not really, I replied. Not unless it's something contagious that could hurt the kids. But it's not, is it? No, George said heavily. She's not in a hospital like that. She's at the Catherine Center. Ah, I thought to myself. The Catherine Center was a mental hospital, though in today's PC climate, they would never call it that. They called it a mental health and stress clinic. Okay, whatever. Well then, as long as it doesn't affect the kids, I don't care, I said nonchalantly, and ended the conversation. I finished my business, locked up my office, and hurried to the Carson house. The drive was about 20 minutes, and as I drove, I thought about Brittany. It didn't happen very often, except in nightmares when I saw her in that damn tea. But now I wondered again why that little slut had ruined our marriage and torn our family apart. After the divorce, I had pondered this myself many times, but never bothered to ask her about it. I didn't trust or respect my ex, and didn't think she would tell me the truth. I analyzed the usual reasons cheating spouses give for their behavior and discarded most of them. Here are some of the possible reasons for her cheating behavior that I considered. 1. Wealth. No, I don't see it. Ben was certainly wealthy, but so were we. We had very decent savings. We had a nice house in a great neighborhood. We didn't worry about paying monthly bills or making repairs. We weren't rich, but we weren't poor either. 2. Spouse cheating. No. Since we agreed to date each other exclusively, I have never once touched another person. So why? I don't know, and it didn't matter anymore. As soon as I saw her having fun with someone other than me, our marriage was over. Infidelity is unforgivable to me. If you don't have the strength to be faithful, don't do it. Yes, friends, it really is that simple and easy. These days, society is sympathetic to people who don't get married, so there's no reason to get married and then cheat. If I had forgiven her and stayed with her, I would have lost all my self-respect. Arriving at my former in-laws' house finally dispelled the oppressive flow of my thoughts. Their front door swung open as I pulled up the gravel driveway to the house. Danielle and Brian were already waiting for me when I got out of the car and headed for the door. I knew right away that they weren't doing well. Brian was standing very close to his big sister. Danielle, in turn, had one arm wrapped protectively around him. The kids got along fine with each other, but this behavior was certainly not typical. Behind them stood George, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. He looked at me with a bitter, angry look as I climbed the short stairs. When I reached the porch, he leaned toward the children. "Children," he said softly, "I only need to talk to your daddy for a minute. Please go through the house and make sure all your things are ready. One of us will come get you when it's time to leave." "Okay, Dad," Daniel said for both of them. And they turned and went into the house, leaving me on the porch with their grandfather. He gave me a hateful look, the likes of which I had never seen from him before. I just stared back neutrally, waiting for him to spill everything that had come to a boil. "What the hell is wrong with you, Don?" he said finally. "Barring a mild case of nearsightedness, I'd say there's nothing wrong with me. But thanks for asking anyway." "Stop being a smartass. You know what I mean," he snapped angrily. "Your wife is in a mental hospital, and you don't give a damn." "First of all, she's not my wife," I snapped back. "She shit on our marriage of her own free will, and she did it knowing full well the consequences. And secondly, you're right. I don't care. I see no reason why I should, and I don't understand why you're so angry about it. I'm not the one who cheated on her. She cheated on me, you asshole." "It's your fault she ended up in the hospital," he returned. "You put that video on the internet. You ruined her reputation so badly that she's now struggling to find a job where she'll get paid what she's worth. I told you bloodthirsty idiots I'd do it if I didn't get what I wanted. She was warned beforehand, but she decided to fight me anyway. She's reaping the consequences. And by the way, if she's not making as much money as she's worth, she should talk to her pimp about it," I said coldly. "Or is she freelancing?" "You son of a bitch!" he shouted, grabbing for my reflector vest. I grabbed the older man's wrist and easily freed his hand from my clothing. I did my best to be gentle. I had no desire to hurt him, but no one would hurt me, and that was that. "Think carefully before you try to use physical force on me, George," I said softly and calmly. "I know you love Brittany, but the truth is that everything that has happened to her lately is her own fault. You can accuse me of anything, but even you have to realize the truth. Besides, if it were you, wouldn't you have done the same thing I did?" I squeezed his wrist tightly until he finally relaxed his hand. I let go of him and gingerly stepped back. He looked more defeated than anything else, but I wanted to make sure he didn't try to take a swing at me. "I don't know, maybe I'd try," he said. I guess it's easier for me to be mad at you than to admit that my daughter—" He paused and shook his head in vehement denial. After taking a few moments to gather his thoughts, he looked at me again and took a deep breath. "Maybe you can at least let me tell you what's going on," he said. "Okay, go ahead," I said in annoyance. If George noticed my tone, he chose not to mention it. "Brittany tried to kill herself," he stated emphatically. Do the kids know what she did? I asked. Yes, he replied, closing his eyes in pain. Danielle was the one who found her mother unconscious on the bed and called 911. Brittany had apparently intentionally taken an entire bottle of sleeping pills. When she didn't come out of her room when the kids got home, Danielle went in to check on her. He sighed heavily and wiped his eyes with his hands. His shoulders slumped slightly, and I felt a slight note of sadness for him. After all, it wasn't his fault what his daughter had done to me. For my children, on the other hand, I felt just awful. I can't imagine how Danielle felt when she found her mother in such a state. And at the same time, I was proud of my girl for not losing her head in a crisis and doing the right thing. I specifically made a note to myself to tell her that. How are they coping with what happened? I asked George. Danielle and Brian are both terribly upset, but I think it was worse for Brian, said George. Daniel hasn't left his side all evening. I nodded my head slowly. Okay, thanks for telling me. I'll keep a close eye on the two of them, I said. Over the next few days, that's exactly what I did. I talked to both of them about what had happened to their mother. I also praised Danielle for her quick thinking and calmness in the midst of the crisis, making her young face glow with happiness. After several weeks of treatment, Brittany was discharged. She was declared recovered, but I didn't buy it. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I don't see how simply talking to a professional and possibly popping pills could solve problems so serious that she thought suicide would solve them. She insisted that we go back to the joint custody we had been following all along. I asked my children what they thought of the idea. Daniel was clearly hesitant, but Brian was excited, almost jumping for joy that he would get to spend time with his mom. Unless you want to get into a long, drawn-out legal battle again, you're going to have to give her what she's asking for, Mandy said when I told her how I felt. You might be able to convince the judge that you're right. After all, a suicide attempt is pretty strong evidence that you're an unfit parent. Mandy's voice was calm, but her eyes spoke of something else entirely. From the way they were drilling me, it was clear how she felt. My own feelings were mixed. I was still furious at Brittany. I couldn't bear the thought of giving her access to the kids again. But Brian had at least made his desires clear. He wanted to get back in touch with his mother as well as me. Danielle, I knew, would go with her brother to keep an eye on him. She would turn into a lioness when he was worried. Under other circumstances, that would have been cute. I'm not going to try to make it so Brittany can't see the kids, I finally said. Mandy's look softened. No, I didn't think you'd be like that, she said. But on the other hand, I don't want any of the kids to go through the trauma of their mother trying to kill herself again, said I. I don't know what happened to her that turned her into such a selfish, irresponsible bitch, but you can't deny that it happened. Mandy leaned back on the back of the couch next to me, her expression thoughtful. Then she sighed softly. Why don't we talk about something more pleasant than her? I suggested, stroking her hand. Mandy smiled and kissed me lightly. I'm always up for talking about something nice, she said. What do you mean? Here it was, the moment of truth. Over the past few months, I had only grown closer to Mandy. She was everything I wanted to see in a woman. She spent almost every night at home with me, sharing my life, even during the weeks when I was with the kids. Finally, I decided it was time to pop the question. It was only the second time in my life, and I was nervous as hell as I pulled the ring box out of my pocket. I thought we could talk about our future, I said. Mandy, I love you, and so do the kids. I love being with you, and I hate being separated from you. Mandy. I opened the ring box and held it out to her. Will you marry me? Her eyes got huge as she stared at the ring box. I told my children my intentions, and they not only approved, but they helped me pick out the ring. Mandy raised her eyes from the ring box and looked at me, and her gaze was sad. There was no way I was expecting that. She reached over and carefully closed the lid of the box. Dawn, this is a very beautiful ring, and I'm touched. I like you very much. But marriage? Really? Mandy shook her head gently. Dawn, honey, you're a wonderful lover. And from what I've seen, you're a great father to your children. You're a good man, and you've treated me like a princess since we've been together. You'll make a good husband. But not to me. I sank back down on the couch. I don't understand. If I'm a really good person and all, why don't you want to marry me? I asked. I felt like we were so well suited for each other. We could be really happy together and build a wonderful life. But Mandy shook her head, her eyes sad. She gently reached out and stroked my face, brushing away a tear I didn't even realize I had. Dawn, honey, it's not just because of you, Mandy said softly. It's partly because of me. I'm not sure I even want to get married, but if I ever do, it won't be to a man who already has kids and an ex he has to deal with all the time. We had a lot of fun together, Dawn, and I don't regret a second of the time we spent together. But… She paused, casting a brief glance at the floor, then looked me in the eye again. Dawn, for me, it was all just fun. It wasn't because I wanted to get married. I'm not sure, but I think the crushed remnants of my heart hit my diaphragm. It must have made my breath catch in my throat. But I didn't make a sound. She'd already started nibbling at my senses, and I might as well let her finish the job. Now, looking back, I can see why you thought exclusivity meant more than just having a good time. I'm sorry about that. I really didn't mean to mislead you. In fact, it never occurred to me that you might want to remarry, given what happened to you, she said. I see, I said quietly. I jerked my hand away and stared at the ring box that still rested in the palm of my hand. I sighed, shrugged, and tossed the box carelessly over my shoulder, not caring where it would fall. Thanks for being honest with me, Mandy, I said. I'm sorry I bothered you with my problems. Please forget what I said about, you know. I already knew that trying to apologize was pointless. Mandy was already packing her coat and purse. Knowing what was about to happen, I got to my feet and met her at the door. I opened it and watched her cross the threshold. She froze on the threshold for a moment and looked into my eyes. It seemed like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. We stared at each other for a moment before I leaned in to kiss her goodbye one last time. She turned her head, and my kiss landed on her cheek. Wow, I thought to myself. I'm not even worth a last kiss. I realized there was no hope for us, so I backed away, closed and locked the door behind her. Next chapter. The weeks after Mandy left my life were rough. I'd been dumped before, not counting my ex-wife breaking up our marriage rather spectacularly. It had happened a few times. But for some reason it hurt more with Mandy than in most previous cases. Maybe it was because she was the first woman I'd connected with emotionally, not just physically. At first, the kids questioned me about Mandy's departure from our lives. They asked why she said no, why she didn't want to see us anymore. I told them it wasn't about them. It was about her not wanting to see me anymore. Danielle, who had just turned 10, was very perceptive for her age. I think, from the look in her eyes, she could guess that there was more truth in what she was saying than I was willing to say. If so, she was kind enough to let me walk away with my edited version. As the weeks went by, my son Brian made sure to mention Mom almost every day when it was my turn to receive him and his sister. Of my two children, Brian missed our former family life the most. It didn't surprise me that he tried, childishly, to get Mom and Dad back. I guess to some extent that was to be expected. All I could do was move on with my life. Yes, there were dates, and yes, some of them had happy endings. After the experience, I made sure that everyone I dated was on the same page as me. No more misunderstandings. Anyway, it turned out not to be a big deal. None of the women I dated wanted anything permanent with a man in my circumstances. Of course, there were exceptions. I dated a few single moms who might have been interested in something more, until I got to the part about the crazy, suicidal ex. Then they usually found an excuse not to date me. Some of them didn't want to put their kid through that kind of drama. Others didn't want it for themselves either. I guess I didn't blame them, but life was lonely. I still talked to Angela from time to time. She had divorced good old Ben, but she wouldn't clean it out, so to speak. She didn't want to keep the huge house she shared with Ben. There were too many memories in it, she said. Besides, she wanted a house that was a home, not a status symbol. So she and Ben sold the house, split the equity, and each of them bought another home, about the same way it happened to me. And she didn't want to sell her share of Ben's real estate business, so she didn't pursue the maximum alimony she could get. She also didn't quit her office job, although she did her best to minimize contact with her ex. Admittedly, she was a stronger person than I was. No way in hell would I have volunteered to spend so much time with Brittany. Nevertheless, she commanded my respect. Angela didn't attack me for posting the video. That would have been a bit hypocritical of her. She predicted that I wouldn't get custody of the kids unless Britt allowed me to. And of course, we all knew that Britt would never go for it. Thus, the release of the video was inevitable. Nevertheless, I was perceptive enough to realize how angry she was that I had done it. She assumed I was using the video as evidence in divorce proceedings and was horrified when I told her what I was actually going to do with it. I think part of her soul doubted that I would follow through. In case anyone is wondering, no, Angela and I never got back together. We're just too different to be happy together, and we're both mature enough to realize it. But we are friends, and she was always there for me when I needed someone to consult with. Her son, Robert, who still let people call him Robbie when his friends weren't around to hear it, is a frequent visitor to my house, as he and Brian are in the same grade, at the same school, and get along well. It was during one of her visits to my house that Angela found the ring box. After Mandy left, I didn't go looking for it. It was nothing to me anymore. It wasn't worth looking for. I know I could have sold it and gotten some money for it. I just could never bring myself to do it. Angela found the thing under the edge of an old Hoosier cabinet in the living room and pulled it toward me with a questioning look. I looked at the slightly dusty box sitting on the coffee table and sighed. Angela's raised eyebrow indicated that she didn't want to drop the subject until I explained, so I mentally shrugged. I told her about asking Mandy to marry me and what the results had been. Angela listened without comment. When the pathetic story was told in full, she shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dawn," she said. "Thank you," I said. "But you don't have to be sorry for my blunders. I'm just not a good judge of character when it comes to relationships. Truth be told, the only woman on the planet who thought I was worthy of being with her ended up being a cheater. It's ironic when you think about it." "Well, join the club," she said, snorting. "Apparently I don't choose men any better than you choose women." We both laughed briefly and bitterly. But she was being a bit sly, and we both knew it. She had a man she was dating exclusively. They had been together for about a month now. I don't know if she saw wedding bells in her future or not, but I was dating this guy, and would be very surprised if he didn't propose to her at some point. "How... do you think maybe the problem is me?" I asked after a while. "I don't know, Dawn," she replied with the candor I expected from her. "Maybe you have some unresolved issues that are keeping you from connecting with someone. I know that the fact that you never found out why your ex cheated is keeping you down. Honestly, I don't know why you never tried to find out, but that's your business." She gave me an assessing look and frowned. "Your looks aren't a problem, that's for sure," she said, sizing me up. I think I even blushed a little. "Look, I'm no professional, but I think you need to talk to her. Brittany, I mean." "You really think talking to my ex is going to help my love life?" I asked doubtfully. "Well, Dawn, at this point, what do you have to lose?" she asked. Good point," I admitted. "I guess it can't hurt." Next chapter. That Sunday when I dropped the kids off at Brittany's house, I walked out with them instead of dropping them off. My son and daughter looked at me in amazement. I had never gotten out of the car at their mother's house before. Brian looked worried and Danielle looked concerned. "I need to talk to your mom," I told them both firmly. "I'm not here to see her again, and I'm not going to cause any problems. Understood, kids?" They both nodded silently, and I walked over to the door and knocked firmly. I knocked twice more before Brittany finally answered. It took my breath away. She was as beautiful as ever, even in her uniform from the diner where she worked as the day shift manager. Redhead! Why do you kids knock when you know I'm leaving the door unlocked for you? She stopped when she saw me standing there, her eyes widened in surprise. Then they narrowed in anger. What do you want? She asked, barely polite. I want to talk to you, please, I said. About what? She demanded. I looked silently at our children, who were still standing on the porch, staring at the two of us with wide-open eyes that read fear and surprise. She didn't seem to get the hint, so I explained to her. Can we discuss this in private? Fine, she growled. Go inside, you two. So, she began, once they were in the house and the door was closed. What did the great and marvelous Donald want to talk to this poor sinner about? It must be something very important. I want to know why you cheated on me, I replied simply. What? She was surprised. I said I want to know why. I heard you, damn it, she snapped back. But why the hell are you asking me that now? It's been over a year. Hell, it's been almost 18 months. If you really cared about the reason, why didn't you ask then? I was so furious about what you did that I didn't care why you did it, I answered honestly. But now that I have time, I want to know. Why did you destroy our marriage and family? You're going to blame it on me, aren't you? Well, you're the one who decided to have fun with other people, I said in a reasonable tone. I never cheated on you. I didn't even think about it. What I had was too precious to me, and I always thought I could trust the love of my life. If you don't want to tell me, just tell me and I'll leave. I didn't think you'd tell me. Brittany's blue eyes drilled into me, her anger obvious. I just couldn't understand that anger. Her circumstances were the result of her own actions. All she had to do was be a faithful wife, and none of this would have happened. Was that so hard to do? But hell, even if she couldn't do that, at least she could have divorced me before she started having fun. At least if she had done just that, I wouldn't have lost all respect for her. But she couldn't even do that for the man she promised to love and cherish as long as we both lived. For a few moments I watched her face, noting the variety of emotions playing on it as clearly as images on a movie screen. Finally, she seemed to resolve some inner struggle. For a few moments her gaze dropped to the porch as she gathered her thoughts. Finally, she lifted her face again and looked me in the eye. She mewed. For a long time, I felt the desire to be with another woman. Her voice was very, very quiet. I had to strain to hear her. Why didn't you do that in college before we started dating? I asked. I tried a couple times, but I always chickened out, she said. I was afraid my parents would somehow find out. After standing for a few moments to gather her thoughts, she continued. One night when I was working the last shift, she managed to catch me alone in the women's locker room. After that first time, I realized I could never give her up. So you decided you were gay? I asked, hardly believing it. I was so sure that wasn't the answer. But Brittany shook her head negatively. No, I'm not gay, she said. But I'm bisexual, absolutely. She paused again, apparently trying to find the words to explain. But that's not all. I knew how you felt about monogamy, and I realized that even if I could give up Jamie, it wouldn't matter to you. That one time would have been the defining moment for you. Well, I admit you were right, I said. I made that clear in the beginning. Yes, you did, she agreed. So it was so easy to just give up everything we'd built over the last 11 years for a quick fling with another chick, I stated emphatically. I actually felt even worse than before. I don't know what I expected to hear, but certainly not this. I didn't say it was easy, Donnie, she said, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than hatred in her facial expression. Damn it, Brittany, it couldn't have been too hard for you. After all that, I still can't believe what you did, said I. Despite my reassurances to the kids, I could feel my temper flaring up. After a second or two, I corralled him back into the cage, but it wasn't easy. What about Benny the bastard? I asked. Where does that stupid bastard fit in? He's definitely not another woman. No, he's not, Brittany replied with a sigh. He came to the gym and signed up for a spinning class I was leading. We started chatting and he ended up becoming one of my personal training clients. He started talking to me about the time we spent together in college. After a while, he started soliciting what he called a little fun on the side from me, but I always turned him down. She paused in her recollection and turned away from me for a while. I didn't push her. There was some truth in what she was saying, though it was hurtful and unpleasant. If Angela was right, I needed to hear it. All of it. Finally, she turned to face me. I knew if you ever found out what I'd done, I was already totally screwed. Ben, on the other hand, was thrilled with the idea. But first he wanted some one-on-one time with me. That went on for weeks. Everything was great until you ruined it. For once, her voice was not accusatory, but matter-of-fact. If anything, she was right. It had been more than enough to ruin our marriage. Given that, why not fulfill her other fantasies as well? For a penny a pound, right? I shook my head. I almost wish I hadn't asked, I said. Angela thought that finding out the reasons for your cheating would make me feel better. But instead, I felt even more inferior. I wasn't good enough for you, and you didn't even respect me enough to tell me that to my face. You just decided to go out and get what you wanted, and to hell with me. Brittany shrugged her petite shoulders. It didn't seem that way to me, Dawn, she said. Or at least I didn't think of it in those terms. I don't know if it helps me to hear it or not, but the truth is, I just didn't think about you at all until I did. It was only afterward that I thought about what the consequences might be. I really didn't intend to hurt you or ruin my marriage. Mom says I'm a terribly weak person, and she's probably right. I started to say something angry, but then stopped myself. There was no point. I'd already pretty much said everything anyway. But strangely enough, I was beginning to realize that Angela was right. Now that the initial pain was gone, I actually felt a little better. I realized that it wasn't me that had pushed her away. It was her own desires that had led her astray. Her mother was right. She was terribly weak. Abandoning 11 years of marriage, a good home and family for a silly affair was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. But it wasn't my fault. Did you ever love me, Brittany? I asked quietly. Of course I did, she replied. I guess a part of me still does. After all, besides the effect it had on our children, I also regret hurting you. That must mean there's still love left in him. Have you ever been faithful to me? I asked. Yes, I was completely faithful to you. Until the night Jamie and I made love, she replied. I'm afraid that for the rest of the year I was a whore. She lowered her head again and took a deep breath. My therapist helped me realize that I was wrong to act the way I did, she said, without raising her eyes. Then her voice became harsh with anger again. But you didn't have to ruin everything. She pointed an accusing finger at my chest. You seriously messed up my relationship with my parents. You ruined my reputation so badly that I can't find a job in my major anymore. Even moving to another state won't help. And you've also ruined my poor little Jamie's life. She doesn't talk to me anymore, but I heard from others that she was plastered with me when you released that video. How could you do that to me? Hey, I told you beforehand that I would do this if I didn't get my way in the divorce. You could have avoided all of this, but you decided to go along with your stupid pride. You thought I was a liar, just like you. But I'm not. I do what I say. Of all people, you of all people should know that, Brittany. Don't even try to dump your problems on me, I said indignantly. She shook her head angrily. No, you snapped. You needed revenge because your stupid male ego was hurt. You got cocky because I needed more than you were willing to let me have. No, Brittany, I said, my voice dead quiet. If that was the case, you should have come to me and told me everything to my face like an adult and divorced me. I would have been terribly angry. I probably would have hated you. But I'd still respect you. I shook my head dismissively in the direction of my ex-wife. But instead, you decided to go full bore and become a worthless whore. You're not even worth as much as the average streetwalker, At least they're honest about what they are, and they get paid for it. The thought of someone like you having parental influence over two young, impressionable children horrifies me. But the courts have already spoken on this, and I can't stop it. I can only pray that your mental illness ends with you. I looked at her contemptuously. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked at me. Damn it. I knew this was a bad idea. There was too much anger and hate in her for us to have a civilized conversation. Not that I said anything I didn't believe in, but I really wasn't going to get into a discussion with her today. Well, at least I had the answers I was looking for. I decided to walk away and leave Brittany to wallow in her misery. I turned to leave, but to my surprise, Brittany stopped me. Wait, I have questions too, she said. What kind? Incredulously, I asked. Why did you so readily give up on me? Why didn't you fight for me? That's a ridiculous question, snarled I. Don't you remember any of the conversations we had while we were dating? Talking about infidelity and how it was destroying families. I told you then that cheating was the only thing I could think of that was a breakup without question. I will never accept that. You knew that before we were even engaged, let alone married. Once you got into it with someone else, there was nothing left to fight for. She shuddered slightly, and a quiet sob escaped her lips. But she wiped her eyes stoically and calmed down enough to ask the next question. How did you know? She asked. We were so careful, and you never break your usual patterns. I snorted an unapologetic chuckle. Believe it or not, it was a complete accident, I said, and proceeded to tell her the whole story of that horrible morning. As I told it, her eyes grew wider and wider. When I finally finished, she sank down into one of the cheap metal chairs she had on her porch. This story is so implausible that it almost cannot be true, she said. Google Earth, after all. I had a view from God, I said bitterly, but with a certain amount of grim humor. Honesty makes me admit that if it had happened to anyone else, it would have been funny. Life is like that sometimes. Did you need to ask anything else? I finally asked. No, she answered very quietly. She looked at me for a long time. When she spoke again, she really surprised me because she said something that I honestly didn't expect to hear from her in any way. Dawn, I'm really sorry. I'm very, very sorry that I'm so selfish, she said. I know I have no right to be mad at you. My therapist says I'm really only mad at myself. It just manifests as anger at you. For that matter, I told the kids that our divorce was my fault, not yours. Of course, I didn't specify exactly what it was, but I told them that. Thanks for saying that, Brittany, I said. It will calm me down a little, at least for the kids' sake. And then I turned and walked away. That was the last time we talked to each other face to face for a long time. Next chapter. Another year went by, and my personal life, I would say lack of personal life, remained about the same. I still occasionally dated a willing woman, but relationships were out of the question, and I rarely, if ever, expected one. I had heard the phrase, time heals all wounds, many times in my life, and I guess there was some truth to it. Time seemed to be taking its time, but I noticed that I was slowly letting go of my bitterness. I enjoyed the time with the kids. Watching them grow and learn has been one of the true joys of my life. Brian, although he had just turned 10, was already showing interest in the family business. He loved helping me with the plants, and especially the Japanese-style rock and sand gardens. Danielle seemed to gravitate more toward a career in healthcare, although she still had plenty of time to change her mind. She was only 12 years old. And speaking of her tender age, she seemed to be beginning to realize that boys weren't exactly what she used to think of as disgusting and vile creatures. Some of them were just adorable. I knew this stage of her growing up was coming soon, but I didn't expect it to come now. It was my heightened concern for Danielle that led to my volunteering to be a chaperone at the children's school sock party that fall. To be honest, Angela and her new husband Mike put a lot of effort into getting me to agree to help too. If you have kids that age, you probably know yourself how hard it can be to get parents involved in things like this. So I watched a bunch of kids pouting and bouncing around the school gym. The music was incredibly loud and, Well, I'll spare you my opinion on the quality of the music. I guess even though I'm only 37, I'm officially old-fashioned by now. I don't even know the name of the other guy who sings in Van Halen. Come on, that was funny. I was focused on the kids to the near exclusion of everything else, really. That's probably why Angela freaked me out so much. Hi, she said. What? I said, a little abruptly. I hate admitting when someone scares me. Why don't you go and talk to her? She replied. Angie, what are you talking about? That teacher over there, the cute brunette in the cream and charcoal sweater, said Angela. She hasn't taken her eyes off you once all evening. It's over in another 30 minutes, so go while you have the chance. I threw a confused look at her. Looking at me? A woman? Angie had to be onto something. I discreetly looked around the hall and spotted the woman she was talking about. Are you sure she was looking at me? I asked, disbelief clearly audible in my tone. I'm sure, said Angela, grinning widely. Trust me, Buster. A woman always notices these things. Go ahead and take your chances, Dawn. At least you'll probably get a night of pleasure out of it. But you never know. It might be more than that. I shrugged. Why not? I'd never had anything with anyone else, and she really was a cutie. Physically, she was almost the exact opposite of Brittany. After thinking about it for a while, I decided to take action. As if to spur me on, Angela slapped me on the shoulder so that no one could see her do it. I'll go, I told her quietly. I smoothly made my way through the crowd of bouncing kids to where the beautiful woman stood. As I got closer, I realized that she was not old, but older than I had first thought. I guessed now that she was about the same age as me. She certainly couldn't have been older than me. When she turned toward me, I saw that her eyes were a startlingly bright shade of green. I had never seen eyes of that shade before, and I wondered if they were her natural color, or if she was wearing some kind of contact lenses. Hi, I said, covering the last few feet of distance between us. I'm Don Summers. I'm Danielle and Brian's dad. She smiled. Oh yes, she had a very nice smile, and extended her hand to me. Hi, Don. I'm Don Rogers, she said, as we shook hands. Dawn and Dawn, I thought, and mentally laughed. This is going to make my head spin at parties. I'm Greg's mom, and I also teach 6th grade here, she continued. Nice to meet you, Dawn, I said, smiling. Likewise, she said. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but it's rather unusual to see a single man as a chaperone at events like this. I'm sure it is, I said, shrugging. But my kids are worth it. Besides, it's not like I have anything else going on. I paused, curious. How do you know I'm single? I asked. Well, for one thing, your ring finger is unoccupied. Besides, that woman you've been seeing all night is here with her husband. She shrugged and continued. I'm good at people watching, and you seemed unmarried to me. You're very good, said I. Yes, as a matter of fact, I am unattached at the moment. She grinned, and it was only then that I realized I was still holding her hand. Oh, sorry, I mumbled awkwardly, letting go of her. Don't be, she said with another of her delightful chuckles. If I minded, I would have let you know. Her smile, as I noted, was very cute. It lit up her face like a beacon and absolutely enchanted me. Her eyes, whether it was the stunning green color or some other features, were hypnotizing. They sucked me in. Not only could I not look away, but I didn't want to look away. After a few minutes, I finally managed to speak again. Honestly, I hadn't felt such a strong interest in a woman since Mandy. We pointed out our children to each other and talked a little about each of them. I told her that Danielle was already talking about being a nurse, and Brian was enjoying helping me with my work. Dawn told me about Greg's love of all things electronic and some of the little troubles that this love had led him to. Apparently, he thought he was some kind of hacker. I was so engrossed in my conversation with Dawn that Angela poked me a second time for crying out loud. Time to pack up the kids, Dawn, she said, smirking at my confusion. DJ's already packing his stuff. Along with the other adults, we started getting the kids ready to leave. After making sure the right child was with the right parent, we cleaned up and left. All of our kids were starting to go sugar crazy, and it seemed like I was really going to have a night of peace and quiet when I got home. As we were leaving, Dawn snuggled up to me. I was a little surprised when she intertwined her hand with mine as we walked the short path from the school gym to the parking lot. "Call me sometime tonight when you have time," she said, tucking a folded piece of paper into my shirt pocket. "I'd love to have dinner with you sometime." And then she and her son headed to their car, and she was gone. Next chapter. That night was a new beginning for me. As you can imagine, I didn't wait long to call Dawn. There was no way I could make up my mind. She was absolutely adorable, and I couldn't get her out of my mind. Our first dinner date didn't end in the bedroom, but it did include some very sweet kisses. She seemed to be as infatuated with me as I was with her, but that clearly didn't mean she was ready to just throw all caution to the wind. I shouldn't have been any more ready for this than she was, but if the opportunity had presented itself, I would have gotten her into bed in a heartbeat. But I'm not the kind of person who would insist on that, so we proceeded at her pace. Dawn was a fascinating woman in many ways. She was very intelligent, but also very practical. Like me, she didn't have a lot of money to throw around, so she came up with a lot of simple life hacks to save money. She freely shared them with me, thus helping to free up the always needed funds for other things. In turn, I learned that she was an avid gardener. She loved to grow plants, especially flowering trees and vines. Unfortunately, she was cursed with a gaunt thumb. Luckily, I knew many techniques for giving ailing plants back to glorious life and was happy to share them. I also helped her, with a few inexpensive fixes, and free labor of course, set up the backyard and patio, turning it into almost an outdoor living room. We grew closer and closer to each other both emotionally and physically. Of course, I told her about Brittany and then about Mandy. To say she was stunned would be a huge understatement. Unlike the other women I'd told the story to, she wasn't particularly bothered by the fact that I'd put the video on the internet. Her opinion matched my own. Actions have consequences, and she actually got off pretty lightly, all things considered. Dawn got along well with my kids, and I have to admit that her son Greg was a good kid. The kids seemed to get along well with each other too. Greg was only a couple months younger than Danielle, and they were in the same grade. Yes, things were going very well with Dawn and me. So well, in fact, that when our relationship reached the 8-month mark, I considered marriage again. Thoughts of the disaster with Mandy wouldn't let me go for a second. I wasn't going to let the past ruin my future. Of course, I knew there was a chance she would say no, and I was prepared for that, but I didn't think she would. Nevertheless, I talked to my kids about it. Danielle was thrilled about it. Brian wasn't thrilled about it, but agreed that it would be okay. Privately, I think he was still harboring thoughts of me getting back together with Britt. I finally bought another engagement ring. The one I bought for Mandy had to be sold. Now, all I had to do was decide how to propose to her. After some thought and consulting with my mom, I decided to do it on my 40th birthday, which is in just 2 weeks. It won't be a grand party, but my closest friends, my parents, and Dawn and Greg will be there. Yes, I thought, that would be perfect. The only real problems during the 2 weeks of waiting were getting the kids to keep the secret from Dawn and Greg, getting a secret invitation to Dawn's parents and her brother, he was her only brother, and not accidentally doing something that would give me away. Finally, the evening of my birthday arrived. My birthday was actually the day before, but for obvious reasons I was looking forward to Friday night. My parents rented a party room at Misha's, a local restaurant specializing in ethnic Russian cuisine. I had a weakness for pierogi. It was a nice place, but not broke. Plus, it was kid-friendly, which was a big plus. The dinner was excellent, and I enjoyed it immensely. We had a lot of fun eating and dancing. Finally, it was time for the gifts. I opened them and thanked everyone who gave them to me. In doing so, I tried my best not to give away my plans. Dawn was a little surprised to see her parents and older brother at the party, but she took it calmly. When I finished unwrapping the last present, I realized that the surprise had been a success. I put the last gift on the table and stood up. I put my arms around Dawn and pulled her gently against me. She leaned her head against me and I smiled at everyone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said, glowing. "You all made this party the best celebration of my 40th birthday ever." My joke was politely laughed at, and I heard one of the kids complain that he didn't get it. The laughter this caused was the perfect cover for Angela, who crept up behind me, discreetly transferred the ring box to my free hand, and just as discreetly slipped away. "There's just one last thing to do before we all take off. I got a lot of presents today, but I'm hoping to get another one," I said. "I hope Dawn gets me the best gift ever." Dawn tilted her head and looked at me with a confused expression. I lovingly returned her gaze, met her eyes, and grinned at her. "Dawn, I love you so much," I said. "You've made my life complete. The only thing that could make it better is if you gave yourself to me for the rest of our lives." And I got down on one knee and presented her with the open ring box without breaking eye contact. "Dawn, darling, will you marry me?" There was dead silence in the dining room as everyone, including the children, finally realized what was happening. I looked greedily into the eyes of my beloved, expecting to hear her joyful cries of, "Yes, yes." I waited, and waited some more. "Dawn," said I at last. "Sweetheart, please say something." She mumbled, turning away from me and wildly searching the faces in the room with her eyes. "Dawn, this really isn't a good time to talk. Maybe we should—" Dawn stammered half a word and backed away from me. I sighed and got to my feet. With a slowly breaking heart, I watched as Dawn rushed over to Greg, took his hand, and hurried out of the restaurant without even stopping to put on her coat. A few seconds after her hasty departure, I turned around and saw almost everyone staring at me in shock. "Well," I said. "Anyway, thank you all for coming out and making this such a great evening. Have a great evening, everyone." I gave a wide, fake smile and gathered my things. As I put on my coat, I stared at the ring box that lay on the table. I was sorely tempted to just throw it away like last time, but I didn't. I might as well try to get my money back. I slipped the damn thing into my coat pocket and gestured to the kids. "Dawn, honey," Mom said, taking my hand lightly. "Do you want us to pick up the kids tonight?" I shrugged, not really caring about it. "Do you guys want to spend the night with Nana and Pappy?" "Yeah, that would be great," exclaimed Brian. "Daddy," Daniel started, "I'm so sorry." "Thanks, Danny. But you don't have to say anything," I said, firmly cutting off anything she might have said. I wasn't ready to hear something like that yet, and thankfully she understood that. "Just remember that I love you, Daddy," she said quietly. She hugged me tightly, her little arms squeezing me as hard as they could. Then she turned around, gathered her things, and followed her Nana to their car. My dad lingered for a moment. "Well, third strike, eh, Dad?" said I. "Yeah, third strike, son," he replied, not paying attention. "Fortunately, life doesn't just give you one punch. There will be others." "Well, if nothing else, at least I've proven I can still pick the good ones," said I with a bittersweet smile. Dad shrugged and sighed. "Well, son, life shits on all of us at some point," he said. "And you're not alone in that, as much as I hate to say it. All you can do is try to brush it off and get on with your life. Go on and deal with the stress as you see fit. My mom and I will take care of the kids. And if you need to talk, know that we're always here for you." I grabbed my things and left while Angela and Mike settled the bill. I could see that Angie wanted to talk to me, but thankfully Mike stopped her. I know she just wanted to be my friend, but at this point, the last thing I wanted was a friend. The drive home was very short. As soon as I entered the house, I locked the door with 2 locks, threw my things on the couch, and proceeded to eat a serious meal. It didn't last as long as I would have liked. I don't keep anything strong in the house, and my beer supply was not keeping up with the strain. I thought about going to the liquor store on the next street over, but quickly dismissed the idea. Getting drunk would be nice, but I didn't need a hangover tomorrow. Instead, I sat in a chair and started watching 80s sitcoms on Netflix. After a few hours, I felt drowsy. The next morning, I woke up with a desperate urge to pee, and my back was stiff from sleeping in the chair. I'll have to remember not to do that from now on, I thought to myself, as I did my morning chores and then showered. Once dried off, I put on clean clothes and went in search of breakfast. An aspirin. Apparently, I'd had enough beer to deal with the hangover, damn it. While I fried eggs, I tried my best not to think about Dawn. She was hurting much worse than my head. What was wrong? I was so sure she felt the same way I did. Of course, my traitorous mind remembered that I had felt the same way when I proposed to Mandy. Foolish mind. That's when I decided I was done with the concept of marriage. From now on, friends with benefits was the way of the future. I finished breakfast and cleaned myself up. I then spent some time in the basement working out on the exercise machine. Pure exercise was just what I needed to relieve my stress and anger. Afterward, another shower was needed, which I did. As I was wiping myself dry, I remembered that I hadn't turned on my cell phone after last night. I turned it on, and sure enough, it turned out that the voicemail box was full. There were also a bunch of messages in there. I looked through the messages first and found that they were all from friends, and all were expressing sympathy and offering to talk. The voice messages were about the same except for one, from Dawn. It only lasted a couple seconds and said, "I'm sorry, love. Please believe me, I have my reasons. I hope someday you will understand and forgive me. Goodbye." I didn't respond to a single text or call. I spent the rest of the day watching TV until my parents brought the kids home in the evening. That, in fact, is the whole story of my life. In many of the stories I read, the husband who was cheated on ends up getting rich, marries a supermodel who is 15 years younger than him, and desperately wants to bear him children, lives in a mansion, and eats steak for dinner. I love reading stories like this, like everyone else, but I'm afraid my life wasn't like that. It's been 10 years since my divorce from Brittany. Danielle is in college, studying nursing. I was a little surprised she made it through all those years, but was glad. Brian just graduated high school and will be going to college in the fall. He plans to become a businessman. Will he want to join the family business? Only time will tell. I'm 45 now, and I'm still single. Every once in a while, I meet someone for some bedroom fun, but I don't have anyone in my life that I would call special. A year ago, Mandy came back into my life, at least in a way. She just wanted to have a good time, only this time she made that clear from the start. We partied together regularly for about 2 months, and then she left without any hard feelings. She asked me why I never got married, and I told her the truth. It's no longer worth the risk. I would love to have a wife. I would love to wake up every morning with the same face and know that she is mine. To know that she will be there for the rest of my life. But some stories don't have happy endings, and, so far, it looks like mine will be one of those. Dawn's parents told me that she moved in about a year after I had my marriage proposal disaster. Before you ask, no, I didn't seek out that information. They came to me on their own, hoping I could convince her to come back. I thought it was crazy, since the thought that she might be with me was probably the reason she left. I don't know that for sure. Dawn never bothered to tell me her reasons, and I'm just not interested in asking. Screw her. Brittany, on the other hand, eventually got married. She, and my son Brian, tried for several years to somehow reconcile us with her, but it just wasn't meant to be. I don't believe in people changing who they are. Britt was a cheating whore, and no amount of regret, grief, and psychotherapy could change that. Eventually, they gave up, and she married the owner of the diner where she worked. The kids say they are happy. Good for them. I hope for his sake he got that bitch to sign a prenup. She's still a very, very attractive woman. My father died a few months ago, leaving the business to me. Unfortunately, I don't think my mother will be here for long. She's grieving too much. The agony of losing my father can be felt in her every look, every word, and every movement of her body. I've always wanted for myself the kind of loving, committed marriage they made, but maybe that's not possible in our modern world. I don't know. I'm a landscaper, and I'll leave the philosophy to the experts. Before leaving me for the second time, Mandy asked me an interesting question. Do you have any regrets? She asked. Well, yes, of course I do. I regret marrying a cheating whore. I regret wasting my time with Mandy, the first time, and Dawn, thinking they were potential girlfriends. I regret not being able to meet anyone with the same values and desires as me. But then I realized what Mandy was really asking. She actually wanted to know if I regretted making Britt a famous amateur star. She wanted to know if I regretted divorcing her as fast as I could and hating that bitch for years. The honest answer is no. I regret that releasing the video was necessary, but I don't regret doing it, and I never will. She got what she deserved. If I had to do it all over again, I would have done the same thing. Maybe I saved her new man some trouble. If so, at least something good came out of it. As for me, I'll keep working. I will continue to love my children and watch them grow. I will look forward to seeing my grandchildren, when and if the time comes. I will never completely give up on finding my own wife. As I've said before, to find one, you have to search. But that is no longer a priority for me. I will enjoy the happiness I can find when and where I can find it. It's not the life I would choose, but it's not a bad life. And yes, during downtime in the office at work, I still occasionally indulge in contemplation of God's eye. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.